If I would have known that you were going to do that, I would have said no when you said you're going to. That's true.
Before you go,
Yes.
I enjoy your sermon every time you come around.
Well,
That's why I call you doctor. That's true.
well, thank you. So today we are launching into wisdom. And I tried my best to get Tom to come and teach today, but he would not do it. So unfortunately, you're left with me. And so we have the way of wisdom. And quite frankly, I'm going to pay Greg back here because, in my opinion, you entered into wisdom last week. Greg, last week was an absolute masterpiece. I would not have touched that lesson with a 10-foot pole. I mean, seriously, I don't want to pour it on too much, but the Holy Spirit was alive and well last week, Greg, and I certainly appreciate you allowing him to use you as his vessel. And I can only pray that he is still here this week. So thank you very much. So the way of wisdom, wisdom is often associated with the owl. And I asked myself, well, I wonder what Google has to say about why an owl is associated with wisdom. So you go into Google, it says AI generated. So what does artificial intelligence tell you about why an owl is associated with wisdom? And this morning it resonated. Well, they're nocturnal. Yeah, that has nothing to do with wisdom. They have keen eyesight. And think about them being nocturnal. With keen eyesight, it gives them the ability to discern things in the dark. Now, the reality is that probably the single biggest reason they're associated with wisdom is that Greek mythology, Athena was the goddess of wisdom, and the owl was connected with Athena. So who knows? But I actually like the first one better. But the owl is associated with the way of wisdom. And so we're going to go into that today. So if you're looking for wisdom, you started last week. We're going to continue that today. The book of Proverbs is, of course, attributed primarily to Solomon. And as you will recall, we were studying in 1 Kings. Not sure, it might have been Oleg. I'm not 100% sure if he played that week, but you recall in chapter 3, the Lord came to Solomon in a dream and says, okay, you're the king. Ask for anything you want. Wow. You ever thought about how you would answer that question? And he's asking this question to what we think is about a 17 or 18-year-old young man. Here's his answer. He said, for I am just a child, so give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and distinguish right from wrong. Think about that. Think about the very wisdom that was a part of what this young man said. Number one, he said, your servant, govern your people, please give me a discerning heart. What amazes me about that, and also about this book, is that wisdom, of course, is associated with people who have a lot of knowledge generally. But wisdom, as we will find, is not so much about what you know, it's knowing what you don't know and seeking it from those who does. And of course, the most important thing is about who you know. And so this, despite everything that you say, all comes down to that, as we all know. So folks, I don't think you're going to learn anything new today. If anything, I think this is going to reinforce things that we generally attribute to the New Testament, goes all the way back to the Old, particularly in chapter 8. All right. A couple of caveats before we go in. I'm going to admit that my humanity, as I ventured into this, caused me to have some doubts. Because all this is attributed to Solomon, right? The thing about Solomon is we know that he was an extraordinarily wise man. We know that people came from far and near to get that. By the way, I read something recently that the Queen of Sheba, who knows if this is true, but when the Queen of Sheba came to visit Solomon, it wasn't necessarily to hear what he had to say, but she wanted him to father a child. Don't know, but we know that he was quite adept at that as well, because he had so many wives, but be that as it may. The point is that Solomon did not end well. He didn't. Two big things we're going to talk about here today is morality, and we're going to talk about fatherhood. speaking to that. Well, Solomon had 700 wives, 300 concubines. And so while there may be a perfectly good reason for that, in our culture today, we would not view that necessarily as an example of morality. We also don't know if he was a good father, even though he had lots of good things to say, because his offspring, as we'll find in a few weeks, struggled. So what right did Solomon have to give us advice about these things? Breck, I knew you were going to ask that, so I'm just going to go ahead and get it out. And quite frankly, we talked about that last week. And so I had this barricade in front of me. I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to get through this? And finally, it dawned on me that says, by the way, contrasting Solomon with the New Testament authors is the exact opposite. Think about a New Testament author, John, Peter, Paul. They ended well. There's another proverb out there. Greg, I'm surprised you didn't put it in this teaser. It's not how you start, it's how you finish, right? And so the New Testament authors ended well. And I got to thinking about that. Well, what was different with them than what we had in the Old Testament? Well, who did they get to spend their time with? Who did they have a relationship with? Who did they walk with for 3.5 years? They had that connection to Jesus, which allowed them to end well. Now, that was available back in those days, but in a little bit different form. So as we go through this, it finally hit me, says, I need to get past this barrier I have with Solomon and say, perhaps his credibility and my questioning of his credibility lies in the answer itself. And that is, he learned from his mistakes. And not only that, he probably had an obligation to tell his reader, us, say, look, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. That imparted wisdom to me, so I'm going to impart that too. And so that's how I kind of got through that. So what better teacher than one who's been there and done that? As we all know, most of us, appreciated Jack's joke last week about, Song of Solomon for seniors. As I look through the crowd, most of us are kind of in that bucket. So we got a wise group here. All right, so let's launch into our study. The purpose of Proverbs. One of the things I love about the book of Proverbs is there's very little ambiguity. It shoots straight from the hip. And it also caused me to appreciate even more than ever the Bible. When you look at the breadth of what the Bible does and the different styles of writing and communication, as we all know, Daniel and Revelation is full of symbolism. It's very hard to understand at times. Jesus' parables were even at times hard to understand. And Proverbs, boom, he tells you, is that it? Well, the thing is Proverbs is not a theological book. Proverbs is quite simply an instruction manual from God on how to live life in a sinful world. And so he has done that. I've listened to a lot of commentators, a lot of preachers leading up to this. Almost without fail, they would say Proverbs has 31 chapters for a reason. 7 months out of the year, you got 31 days. Read a proverb a day. Double up on those other 5 months, and it'll do you well. Makes a lot of sense. So maybe we can start afresh on April 1, reading Proverbs 1 and go forward. So the purpose is lined out very, very clearly. Proverbs, he opens it up. He said, this is what this book is about. Now, I'm going to read through the first 6 verses, and then we'll say verse 7 together. So these are the Proverbs of Solomon, David's son, king of Israel. Their purpose is to teach people wisdom and discipline, to help them understand the insights of the wise. Number 3, their purpose is to teach people, and 2, not only to see it, but also to live it, to live disciplined and successful lives, to know what's right, just and fair. They'll give insight to the simple, knowledge and discernment to the young. And 5 and 6 really go together. Let the wise listen to these proverbs and become even wiser. Again, wisdom is not a destination. It's an indication that you have learned along the way and there's still more in your grasping. By exploring the meaning of these proverbs and parables, the words of the wise and the riddles. 7, all together. Fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. Fear of the Lord. You know this, but I'm going to tell you again. Fear of the Lord isn't being scared. Fear of the Lord isn't doing what's right because God's going to be mad at us. You know that fear of the Lord is about respect and it's about reverence and things along that nature. And think about the relationships that you have with your friends. Your best friends, you respect, you revere them. And so therefore, the relationship with your friend and who you respect and revere is the same it is with God. So having that relationship with God, respecting and fearing him, will allow our minds to be able to have the wisdom imparted to us. As we all know, oftentimes what somebody tells us means very little until we've experienced it. But what Solomon's saying, I'm going to tell you a whole lot of things here, but you may have to ultimately get in there to experience it from time to time. Okay, so now let's dive into the structure of the book. First of all, what is a proverb? Greg defined it for you in the teaser, but what's a proverb? A proverb is a series of pithy statements. I know what pithy means. You do? Well, man, you're smarter than me, because I have never heard of the word pithy until I started this today. So I had there's another word, if you say that with a lisp, I've heard lots, so I'm not going to go there. But anyway, pithy, again, if you look up Google, it says concise and forcefully expressive. Concise and forcefully expressive. What's loaded with those? I would add also generally proven true by experience. So a concise and forceful statement, generally proven true by experience. Okay, what a proverb isn't. This is the second thing I knew Breck was going to bring up, so I'm going to deal with it right now. Okay, Proverbs is not a hard and fast promise. It is not a command. These statements are generally true. We'll find examples of that. I'm quite certain I'm going to hear from you later in the class about these are generally true statements. I like to think of them as the 80-20 rule. You know what the 80-20 rule is? 20% of the time, if you do these things, you'll get 80% of the result. Probably in that general thinking, most of the time, if you follow these proverbs, what they to tell you, you will end up happening. And so we have to keep that in mind. And finally, one thing I learned from this is brevity is a gift. How many of you go to a 20-minute sermon and walk away inspired? You go to an hour sermon and you leave mad. Brevity in and of itself is that, which means I probably need to start talking very soon. You guys paid a lot of money to be here, so we're going to make sure you get your money's worth. All right, so the big themes in Proverbs are these, and who is the audience? Number one, the mega theme, of course, is wisdom. Wisdom is the underpinning of everything. Wisdom, if we have it, we impart it. It trends into our relationships. Our relationships are enhanced by our communication. Our communication is done in a way that we understand the other party and all those sorts of things. It trends into our work. Work is not meant for lazy people. You will very seldom find a very wise person who is lazy. And oh, by the way, it also leads to success. And this isn't generally success the way we would define it. Generally, think about success. Tom Brady, the greatest of all time. Michael Jordan. These guys are up here doing these things in the sports world. Somebody who has a lot of money, those sorts of things. God views success as someone who has a good reputation, who has moral character, and finally has spiritual devotion to him. So that's what this is geared to. The audience, chapters 1 through 9, is focused on young people. This makes great sense because the very nature of being young is the young person hasn't had time to experience all the things in life that brings about wisdom. So a third of the book, Solomon is talking to his son. The other thing that hit me as I was reading that is think about how this church has spent their money over the past 4 or 5 years. We've spent, I don't know how many millions of dollars, but where was the vast majority of that money spent? Right over here. I think we're investing in our youth. So good for us, right? Makes sense. Now, when somebody came to me and asked me for money and said, we're going to spend all this money on the youth, and I said, well, that's all well and good, but us old people who are giving you money, we'd like to have some space too. And so we've got this glorious room here, which we're very thankful for. But investing in the youth makes a great deal of sense. And so the second half of the book the last 2/3 of the book is, think about 1 through 9 as being a foundation. We're building the foundation. We're developing some principles, some key statements, some themes, and then the rest of the book is effectively commentary and details carrying that out. So the way we're going to do this today is that I'm going to pontificate for about the first half of this. maybe 15, 20 more minutes, and we'll get some feedback, but I'm going to focus it on chapters 1 through 9. Okay, and then hopefully that'll leave us about 25 to 30 minutes. And then we're going to ask you to give us feedback on particular proverbs that you found either frustrating or enlightening, but something that you connected with for whatever reason. We want you to share that back with the class. So that way we can have a nice, well-rounded conversation. So we got the plan? All right, here we go. Okay, chapter 1. Brenda, did you take all my stuff out?
No.
Well, you can tell, you can see that I have, sorry, that was bad. You can see I have a lot to say, don't you? Okay, but let's start off with number 1. Number 1, chapter 1. Remember, this is a father speaking to his son. The first thing he says is the wise listen to their parents. Okay, verses 1, 8, and 9 says, my child, listen when your father corrects you. Do not neglect your mother's wisdom. What you learn from them will crown you with grace and be a chain of honor around your neck. Let's go back to this day and time. Where did instruction take place? The home. We didn't have the education system that we have today. Now, we do know that Samuel started a school of prophets back in the day, but by and large, the education and the training happened in the home. And so Solomon is saying the wise listen to their parents, and he says the fool, all the way through here, he's contrasting the wise person with the fool. We know that the wise person reveres and expects God. We know that the fool doesn't. It's pretty simple. We've known that for years. And then he goes on and says, my child, this is connected to the fool. You figured out that the top one's being connected with the bottom one. He says, don't go along with them. By that, he means the crowd. And through there, he unpacks that a bit and says, stay away from their past. They rush to commit evil deeds and they hurry to commit murder. Stay away from them. I've got to tell you a story because it's amazing when you read these things about how he speaks to the young people, how that brings back memories from when I or you were a child. I was 15 years old. I was working at McDonald's, making $2.25 an hour. I could buy myself a motorcycle, and I thought I was pretty hot stuff. I could move around. I went to a public high school in Fort Smith, Arkansas. I had about 1,500 kids there, and I had a group of guys that I hung around with. A couple of us had motorcycles, one of us had a car. Well, one of the guys in the group had a brother who was a senior. Oh man, he's a senior. He's up there, right? Well, this senior had an altercation with one of his teachers. And I don't know what the altercation was about, but the teacher asked him, his name was Billy, if he would pick up some trash in the room. And the senior responded with some very colorful language that he wasn't going to pick up that trash. So word of that got back to the gang. As sophomores, well, clearly the teacher was in the wrong. We've got to defend Billy's honor. So let's go egg the teacher's house. All right, so we did. So I got on my motorcycle, a guy got on behind me and 2 others, and we went to the neighborhood and we threw eggs at that teacher's house. We'll teach her. Don't mess with the seniors anymore. Well, the next morning, about 5 minutes into my first class, I get a call to the principal's office. I actually didn't go see him. I went to see the vice principal, which are usually the enforcer. Anyway, his name is Mr. Haber. I'll never forget this. So I assume that I'm getting called in for this and wondering what happened. And so I walk into the room and he says, you were involved in something last night, weren't you? I said, well, yes, sir, I was. And he says, well, I want to know who else was involved. And I thought, well, I'm not going to tell you. So I said, no, I'm not going to tell you. Well, in about 2 seconds, he was this far from my face. He goes, oh, you're going to tell me. And if you don't, here's what's going to happen to you. Well, I melted like hot butter on a stove. So everybody came flowing in. And so that's part 1. Part 2 of the story is Mr. Haver arranged for the husband of the teacher to meet with all of us. So we all go into the room and there's his name is Mr. Harwood. I remember his name. And I'm not remembering everything, but I remember one particular thing he said. He says, imagine if your mother was a teacher. And she very nicely asked you to pick up some trash. And that kid told your mother, I'm not going to pick up that effing trash. I don't think I need to explain that, do I? What would you do? Well, that pierced my heart because about 60 days before that, I had lost my father. And I knew that my mother I was in distress. I knew that she was off the charts distress. I'm thinking, how would that affect me if that happened to my mother? Now, if I had listened to the words of Solomon and not followed the crowd, I would have missed out on that wonderful opportunity. And I say that kind of two ways because while I would love to miss that opportunity, I'm telling you that story 50 years later, so it obviously resonated with me. And so as I parlay that into this broad breadth of wisdom that Solomon has given, you know, and we all know that his child is not going to follow everything. But all of a sudden, if he doesn't follow something, he gets whacked like I got whacked, maybe he'll remember, maybe I do need to listen to these things. Okay, continuing on, chapter 1, we introduced to Lady Wisdom. And who is Lady Wisdom? Lady Wisdom shouts in the streets. She cries the public scare. She calls to the crowds and says, come and listen to my counsel. I'll share my heart with you. So he's parlaying to his son, you're going to be faced with all kinds of choices to make out there. But Lady Wisdom is here, here, and here. Pay attention to what she's having to tell you. We then move into chapter 2, where he says, look, wisdom is attainable, but it doesn't fall into your lap. You need to go search it. You need to go search it like you're searching for gold. And we know that as well as anybody, is that when we go work for something, it means much more to us. So if we go search for wisdom, we'll find that. And finally, in chapter 3, he goes in and he says, you got to trust in the Lord. Verses 5 and 6 at the bottom. You've heard this many, many times. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will, and he will show you what path. So let's just unpack this. Think for a second. You start with chapter 1. You listen to your parents. You listen to your mom. You listen to Lady Wisdom. Things are going well. You go search for it in chapter 2. Man, I'm getting really smart. I'm getting this. And then finally, not only that, I trust in the Lord. I trust in the Lord. And so at that point, I'm in my most vulnerable position, aren't I? Because I've done everything right up to that point. Sitting up here on the top of the cliff saying, man, I am pretty sharp. That is the most fertile ground for Satan to work. And that's why he says, don't be impressed with your own wisdom. Because if you want to have a lifetime of serenity and victory, you have got to be continually focused on chasing that relationship. In this case, Lady Wisdom obviously is that relationship. I'll pause for a second. Comments or questions? I want to make sure I give you guys plenty of time. All right, chapters 4, 5, and 7. You'll notice that I skipped chapter 6. We'll come back to that. Chapter 4. What does he say here? He says, listen, pay attention, listen. Sometime after the previous incident, probably about 15 years, when I was married and had kids, I was visiting my mother back in Arkansas. I was going through her Bible. Oh, there was just pearls of wisdom in there. I pull out a little thing, which is not it, unfortunately, but it was on listening. And it was the most profound set of words that I've ever read in my life. And I'm so upset that I didn't keep them because the details were just exquisite. But the lasting memory from reading that is that listening is the most powerful gift that you can give someone who comes to you with. The absolute worst thing that you can do when that person is to immediately tell them how they can fix it, how they can solve it. You have robbed them of their ability to express that. And I'm not sitting here to tell you I'm a model of that by any means. Sometimes, but we all know men, wives, when we hear it, they say, Gary Smalley, we heard him, don't fix it. You know? And so I try very hard when my wife's whining at me to listen. And I just look at her. She goes, I want you to fix this. Okay, I'll do that. But listen. And he says, look, when you do that, you have got to guard your heart, because what's in your heart governs what's going on in your life. And what is your heart? It's your feelings, it's love, it's desire. We gravitate towards things that make us feel that way. And so therefore, our affections go toward our honorable things is obviously the way to go. Well, in my view, he goes so far here because the next 2 chapters is where it really gets personal. This is where I need Dr. Love to come back up here, but I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot. Okay. He says in chapter 5, avoid immoral women. Ladies, you're going to be mad because this is all focusing about you, but just hang on. We'll get. He says, for the lips of an immoral woman are as sweet as honey, and her mouth is smoother than oil. But in the end, she's as bitter as poison, dangerous as a double-edged sword. And then he continues with just general admonition about adultery. He says, drink water from your own well. Share your love only with your wife. Greg, I remember when I get to this next text, that one of the things last week that so artfully, I think it was in chapter 2, where he's advising, don't share your love until it's time.
Yes.
You're speaking that to the female. This is going to be a sexist comment here, so forgive me. Men aren't known for their self-control, right? So giving that advice to the female is just absolute best advice. And he's spending so much time on this because he knows this is a problem for those young people. And so he continues on with this. And then you get over to chapter 7, and he continues it. He continues. So chapter 5 is all about that. Chapter 6, we'll get to in a second, but it has a section on it. And then chapter 7, he does it again. So here's a man who knows what he's talking about, right? How many wives does he have? You know what? He clearly understands what happens in the biology of a normal male. And he's telling them, you got to be careful. You got to be careful. In 22 and 23, he says, the evil man is held captive by his own sins, and their ropes that catch and hold him. It may be sweet for a time, but it's going to turn bitter. So listen to me. In chapter 7, he tells a story. So he presents the facts in chapter 5, and then he tells a story in chapter 7. I'm looking out my window, and I see a man walking down the street, and he gets to the corner, and there's a house where this woman lives. And it says, she seduced him with her pretty speech and enticed him with her flattery. He followed her at once like an ox going to the slaughter. I'm not going to ask you guys to raise your hand. I'm not going to do it. Not going to do it. But if we have an experience, we understand why it could happen that way. He was like a stag caught in a trap, waiting the arrow that would pierce his heart. Like a bird flying into snare, knowing it would cost him his life. He spends roughly 30% of his time talking about sex. And he should, because he's talking to a teenage boy. And I'm not going to ask for any comment. That's all I can. Interestingly, I got to tell you this. About the same time in my high school years, I was reading Reader's Digest. Are you impressed that as a high school kid, I was reading Reader's Digest? Well, in Reader's Digest, remember that section called Laughter, the Best Medicine? Okay, I mean, great. So I'm reading it one day, and one comes to mind. It says, you have a mother who's speaking to her teenage son. And she tells teenage son, she says, you know, research has shown that a young teenage boy has a sexually oriented thought every 17 seconds. So the son listens to her and he looks and he goes, that's ridiculous. He goes, what would I be thinking about the other 16 seconds? So Solomon knows that. There's a song that's out now. Well, something about a woman. He goes, something about the way they bring you to your knees, something about a woman does something to me. It's just the way it is. And so, yes, Arthur.
You know, I'm listening. Solomon had so many things to say about relationships with women. And I can't help but think of what Socrates, who was a philosopher, said. That his advice was, if you have to marry, by all means marry. If you find a good woman, you'll be happy. If you find a bad one, you'll become a philosopher. Solomon sounds like a philosopher.
Yes. Was there more? Okay, good. Got it. Yes.
I find it odd that in the time he spends talking about adultery, and you may characterize it as pontificating as a source, but he's supposed to be wise and imparting pearls of wisdom. There, he makes no reference to God and the Ten Commandments. I mean, it's explicit in the Ten Commandments not to do this. So Why doesn't he do that? Does he just think that this is all going to be taken down and he's a narcissist and all his pearls of wisdom will be available through time?
I'm not going to dignify that response and say you're probably right. But you know what? He doesn't talk about God at all. Now, we got to get to Lady Wisdom here in a second. So yes, Arthur.
I think he does recognize, he says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Is that what he says? So he does acknowledge, but there is this tussle between his humanity, what he does know. And we all face that. No humanity. It's our humanity exposes us to different things that we shouldn't be doing.
It does. Well, and go back to where I started. Solomon was at the pinnacle. I mean, he did all these things right. And when he got up to the pinnacle, he fell. And he fell hard. And that's what I was struggling with. But if you think about that, you think, it's like Greg says, why is Song of Solomon in the Bible? Why is Proverbs? Because here's you have a man who had it all. He failed. And he has a lot to impart. Now, to your point, Greg, let's go to chapter 6. I'm just going to go ahead and go there because I'm spending more time. So chapter 6 is summarized as follows. Swallow your pride. Don't be lazy. Obey your father and mother. Avoid immoral women. Again, you can't play with fire and avoid getting burned. And then all that translates into a section in verses 16 through 19. It says 7 things that the Lord hates. What are those? Look at that. Now, haughty eyes. So they go, okay, what is a haughty eye? I go to Google again. What is a haughty eye? We would characterize it as looking down your nose at somebody. Condescending, pride. I'm better than you, Santiago. So, who's the master of that? We all know it's Satan. But think about, okay, you start with that condescending, that prideful attitude, and everything else follows from that. Lie, kill, you plot evil, you raise to do wrong, you bear false witness, and you sow discord. So, Brecht, that is just a recharacterization of the commandments. Now, he doesn't speak to the commandments, but he clearly references the same concept that the commandments does. Any comments on this? Yes, ma'am.
You have to remember that Solomon at some point was not worshiping God. He was worshiping all of the gods of the wives and he took a whole different, trying to marry, the wives who and their fathers and trying to get nations together and all that stuff. Yeah. So a lot of the wives wasn't for sexual reasons. It was him trying to keep, trying to put things together and do his own,
So your point is, we think that all of his wives is because he was a sex maniac. The reality is he was politically astute and he was buying political by marrying all these people.
That's what he was doing.
So maybe in the Song of Solomon, Greg, he had one person he was talking to.
That's a lot. If you go back and you read the chapters from 3 up, the first one he married, it tells you the reason he did is because her father, had land and he's trying to do his own. Whatever it wasn't. That's what a lot of it was.
Okay, great point. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Yes, Gary.
Do we know when Solomon wrote Proverbs? What period of his life?
I don't know. Does anybody know that? I would love to know. I've thought about that many times, but I haven't heard. Intuitively, you would think it would have been before he fell off the deep end. When we talk about Ecclesiastes next week, you're going to have the same question. I'm really glad Zdravko is teaching that because we'll have someone who really knows what they're talking about here next week. So enjoy. Okay. Now, the next chapter we get to is chapter 8. Folks, this is the most beautiful chapter in the entire book. But if you just read through it, you're going to miss it. But this is what other people said. The praise of wisdom has risen to the great crescendo at this point. Everything is building up to this. Another comment is that Proverbs 8 is the pinnacle of the Bible's view of wisdom. And it's because wisdom is a person. Wisdom is personified in here as Lady Wisdom. Remember, Lady Wisdom has been characterized as she's there. She's on the street corner. She's there if you will just take apart her what she has to say. So, obvious question, well, who is Lady Wisdom? 22 and 23. The Lord formed me from the beginning before he created anything else. I was appointed in ages past at the very first before the earth began. Lady Wisdom is speaking here. Lady Wisdom is telling you who she is. I don't think I have to explain this. Yeah? Now, let's think about a New Testament parallel to this. You think about this for a second, and can you think about a New Testament verse that has a very similar feel to this one? I'll give you a hint. It's in the Gospels. It's at the very beginning of one of them. Okay. Here we go. John 1. How's John 1 start? The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed at the beginning with God. He created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought forth. So in Kelly's view, you have parallel statements to say that in the New Testament, they had the experience of Jesus. John is describing Jesus as being God, being present from the very beginning. In Proverbs 8, you have Jesus speaking in the form of Lady Wisdom. Jesus had not yet come onto the forefront. And so therefore, the same spirit was available to them. At that time, it's just characterized a different way. There may be a better way to explain that, but that's how it fits to me. So now we get back to, let me give you another parallel. So we get, actually it runs before that statement, but it says, I love all who love me. This is Lady Wisdom speaking. Wisdom's a person. I love all who love me. Those who search will find me. I have riches and honor as well as enduring wealth and justice. My gifts are better than gold, even the purest gold. My wages better than silver. I walk in righteousness and paths of justice. Those who love me inherit wealth. I will fill their treasuries. So this reminds me of a text in Matthew that is often referred to as the Great Invitation. The Great Invitation is, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. I am gentle and humble, for my yoke is easy and my burden light. So what we have here is we have Jesus reaching out to humanity throughout the entire course of time and saying, please come to me. You know, searching after wisdom, searching after treasure, that's hard work. He says, look, give you rest. And so here you have a transition in the same concept, same thought, in a slightly different set of circumstances. And it's just Jesus reaching out, saying to you, come to me. Okay. Any comments, questions, disagree? I love it when you don't disagree. Here we go. Okay. All right. Here's how we're going to sum up chapters 1 through 9. Comes down to the wise and to the fool. Number one, if you want to be wise, you need to fear the Lord. And if you fear the Lord, you will bring about integrity, virtue, generosity. It'll lead you to success and peace. Not all the time, but most of the time. And obviously that success and peace is in the hereafter. It's ultimately, it may not be that way on earth. We know a lot of wonderful people that met all the criteria in those two boxes, did not have a life of success and peace. We live in a sinful world. It's complex. We've got this thing, the devil's, and it's just hard. The fool, though, and think about it, the left-hand side is all of us. It's our journey. It's the process of sanctification. We know who Jesus is. He died for us. We want to please him by living a life of this. We stumble and fall all the time, but that's what we do. You contrast with the fool, and that's the person who just completely rejects it all. And so if I sit here and think about salvation for a minute, it's almost harder to be lost than saved. I mean, if we just reach out and try to embrace what God has to offer us, otherwise, the grace, And the mercy that he extends to us is fine. But if you're a fool, on the other hand, you say, I don't want to have anything to do with it. Well, he's going to give you what you want. So that's Kelly's summary of 1 through 9. Okay. So now we got 20 minutes left. And we want to hear what you have to say. It's now your turn. So we want to have some sense of order. Most of you have a lot to say a lot of the time, so I'm going to start over here, ask for a volunteer, talk about that, and just keep going until we run out of time. So over here, does anybody have a proverb that particularly spoke to you? And tell us why it did. Arthur, will you go sit over there so you can? No pressure. If you don't want to, no problem.
And Greg
Good. All right. Okay. We got silence over there. If I get silence here, I may give you a teaser. I may throw something out there to get started. Okay. Tom, you got something for us?
I do. It's a 1631. White hair is like a crown of glory.
Yeah.
It belongs to those who are righteous. Yeah. That's what she said.
Walk in this morning, Tom says, look up 1631. So I did. Now I get it. So yeah, we won't ask Tom to explain that. I think we all got that. So yeah, white hair is a crown of splendor and it's attained in the way of righteousness. So, but now, Tom, we all know that you are going to say the reason that happened to you is explained in chapter 31. And so I want you to look up chapter 31. Okay, we'll come back to you in a second. Anybody else? Oh, no. You want to, now you're telling Carlene? All right, let's hear it.
You've already addressed it, but my favorite verses in the whole Bible are Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, because I think that's the whole nutshell of life. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him. To me, that is the prescription for all. Me too.
Amen to that. And Carlene, does that mean that life's just going to be easy peasy?
To trust in God.
The good times end of it, right? Always. Easier said than done. So we got to keep playing on that. Yes.
One of the things that strikes me is how easily we can fall from the wise side to the foolish side. On the wise side, looking at your last slide here, wisdom and the fear of the Lord, how easily do you begin to believe all that wisdom that you might evolve and you become the fool? It just slips and slides. In virtue, integrity, we all want to be generous. We try to be virtuous, but how quickly do you begin to believe everything that's written about you or that people think about you? And that leads to selfishness. Success. We've seen in our own lives, maybe other people that appear successful, you get deeper into them and it's not as successful. So I don't have an answer, or the comment I'm just saying is it can't be because I have accomplished things on the left. It's because God keeps me moving towards the right, which is good for politics anyway.
Well, and really it goes back to also what Carlene is you've got to continue that pursuit
All the time.
Yeah, and they said, and that's just tough. Yes, Jack.
So the thought process that you just were going through, I kind of related that to life a little bit more. So as human beings, we've experienced, I've experienced this. So you get to a point where you think you know it all. As a pilot, there's marked times in your career that you can actually track when people get to be what I would call very dangerous. Because they actually think they know it all. They actually think they know how to control the situation. And that's when a lot of times you see accidents happen and they fall. And it's very similar.
Well said. Well said. So Do we have an answer on chapter 31 over here, Warner family? Mrs. Warner going to read it? Yeah, Sharon, if you're going to read it, you need to stand up and deliver.
Whole chapters.
No, just the punchline. Just the punchline at the beginning.
There's all kinds of things.
Sharon, if you'd like, I'll take the pressure off. Would you like me to?
Character, she's worth more than the costliest jewels. But then it goes on and on about she gets up before daybreak and she gets all the food ready. She makes her own curtains and red spreads. Her clothes are tasteful and beautiful. She markets beautiful clothes and belts and sells them to merchants. Many women do wonderful things, but you surpass them all. Give her credit for all she has done. She has earned honor and respect with everyone in the city.
So that's what Tom meant to say. When Tom got up and said that gray hair is the crown of splendor is attained by the way, it is because I married the woman that was described. Tom, is that what you meant to say?
Yes.
And see, now Sharon is exhibiting the humility of that woman because she's looking, it's just, well, what is that? Well, that's how wonderful you are. Yes. Right.
Sometimes when you look at, go back and you look at what Solomon is doing with the writing in there, it sets up in most places is sort of a dichotomy. I mean, a wise person and a foolish person, and he carries it through. In my personal opinion, the reality is that it's just humanity that do wise things sometimes and do foolish things sometimes. And it's not black and white, it's part of life. You strive to do things prudently and wisely, but you fall short and do things foolishly. So to characterize someone black and white notion as a fool because of certain events or certain things they do might not be productive. You're actually looking the way humanity actually acts.
And once in a while, you do encounter a real fool.
Say it again.
Once in a while, you do encounter a real fool.
Right. Okay. Anybody over here? Anything you'd like to bring up? Guys, some days I can't get you to stop talking. All right, so I'll throw some out there. Did I miss somebody? Here's one more.
All right,
Please, speak up.
you have moved on. I'm not a scholar, by the way. I'm just reading my favorite proverbs that I read a few weeks ago, and maybe you guys can make something out of it. Okay.
Okay.
So Proverbs 16, verse 3, and also verse 9. It says, "Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established." But then on verse 9, it says, "The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps." So I don't know. I took it as regardless, whatever I give to God, he's just going to make the whole path, the whole way, the whole everything.
That sounds like a scholarly statement to me.
Very good.
Yeah, share. Please, thank you. Good order.
There is a text that I've always thought about. Proverbs, it says a merry heart doeth good like a medicine.
Say it again.
A merry heart doeth good like a medicine.
Oh, yes, okay.
It has been shown that happier people live longer.
Beautiful. Okay. Merry heart doeth good. Anybody over here? I want to make sure you get your opportunity. 18:2. Fools have no interest in understanding. They only want to air their own opinions. There are podcasts out there that exhibit this over and over again. I absolutely will not watch network news because you name it. I'm the host. Patty comes on. Hey, Patty, what about this? The minute she starts talking, I interrupt her. The minute. The fool is always wanting to, and it goes back to that listening thing at the beginning. You know, it's just, that's good. Here's another one, 1533. Fear of the Lord teaches wisdom. Humility precedes honor. If you want to be honored, if you want to have a good reputation, you may want to start with some humility. Do we have much of that in the White House right now? I missed it.
I said, or Congress.
Oh, it's just an absolute mess. Now here's two right here, and this is why I brought up early on that Proverbs are general statements. They're not absolutes. It's exhibited in these two right here. Number one, the fear of the Lord lengthens one's life, but the years of the wicked are cut short. Not always.
It doesn't seem that way, does it? It often does not seem.
Not always. Not always. So, yeah, I struggle with that one a little bit. So you have to look beyond, in order to do that. All right, here's another one, parents. You know as well as I do. This is doesn't always. 22:6. Direct your children onto the right path, and when they are older, they will not leave it.
That's a future promise that's
Yeah.
working.
We've all done it. You look at your children, how they turned out. You look at somebody else in your family, how they turned out, and you think, oh man, I must have done something right over here. But then again, you go to the next thing and they did everything you did, but they did, it's just that one. It's the right thing to do. Yes, Sharon.
The clear word says, train a child in the way he ought to live, and he'll remember it when he's old. But it doesn't say he's going to do.
Remember.
But at least you have taught him.
Done your job. Well, we said earlier, we're going to study about Rehoboam here in a few weeks. He's a mess. Now, I don't know if Solomon was talking to Rehoboam in this conversation, but he's telling all this stuff, and the guy was a complete disaster. There's no absolutes, but it's still the right thing to do. I'm going to keep going. We got 6 minutes. This goes back to the concept of brevity. And we kind of hits on, it says the wise don't make a show of their knowledge, but fools broadcast their foolishness.
For sure.
About the concept of negotiation. I'm not going to pretend that I'm a good negotiator, but the best negotiators more than likely are the ones that do the least amount of talking, because they're keeping their cards close to their vest and they're waiting until the right time to pull them out. That's wisdom. Talk about this.
Quick example. When we were early having discussions with Waterman Hospital, always let the CEO there take the lead in the thing. Till finally one day he said, can't we just give ourselves to you?
Very wise man. Just let him talk. And you talk yourself right into it. And that happened a lot. During this man's tenure. 1528. The heart of the godly, and it's on the same, the heart of the godly thinks carefully before speaking, and the mouth of the wicked overflows with evil order. Yes, ma'am.
I was just gonna.
Please.
No,
Go for it.
One of the ones that keeps me grounded in 16:2. All the ways of a man, but I read all the ways of a person, are pure in his own eyes. But the Lord is the spirits. So I think that, like I said, it keeps me grounded. I come back to that. I think, oh, that hurt.
It did. I was thinking earlier on when we were up there that the seven things that God hates, it's kind of like it's natural to measure oneself according to, well, do I have haughty eyes? Do I do this? Do I do that? It kind of leads me down that path. All right, I'm stimulating you. Okay. All right, we got two over here.
One we actually read last night, the kids in their worship was 31:8. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, ensure justice for those who are being crushed. I can't remember what translation was in that worship book, but that was the proverb, and we should always remember to remind me to speak up, because sometimes people can't for whatever reasons, or and even the author brought out maybe sometimes it's even for animals. Speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd.
One of the problems I was on this past week is Proverbs 1 through there's in vain the net spread in the sight of any bird, but they lie wait for the bird speaking for their own life. All are the ways of everyone. We forget takes away the life of this one. Kind of bloody, but it's about how sometimes we greed to well money that is the type of money that greed, and we set our traps for ourselves. Animals will run away when they see a trap, but this particular one is so insidious that we might not know that.
Thank you. Get that. Yes.
Something practical we can all do. Anxiety in the heart of man causes depression, but a good word makes it glad.
Oh, very neat. Ooh, love that. Love that.
Love that.
Very good. Okay, let's wrap this up. I was actually planning, I wanted to close with stuff around 31, because as we all know, back in these days, it's a very male-dominated society. And if I were a female reading this, it just talks about your immoral women, stay away from them, all that. But I love how Proverbs ends. And basically, it says lots of stuff. But at the end of the day, it says, who can find a virtuous and capable wife? She is more precious than rubies. And I just want to say, ladies, thank you. Because the reality is most of the time, the male is the wage earner, the one who has to go out and conquer, go out and deliver, and we're constantly leaving you to take care of the house, the kids, this and that, and you cannot put a price on that. And so for those of us in that position, we want to thank you for doing that. We know that all of the things in here that are spoken to the son can be equally spoken to the women. And then finally, a preacher that I just loved many, many years ago. It was a New Testament focus, purely from the book of Romans, but he's talked about in 1 John 4:5, it says, he who confesses, or he who acknowledges, or he who declares that Jesus is the Son of God, that God will abide in him. And God abiding in him will bring about new thoughts, new feelings, new motives. That is a very, very quick summary of Proverbs. Okay, so I still like this ending. We're going to use it for a time. And so I'm going to say a couple things. When I do this, we say this together, right? So this pursuit of wisdom is a wonderful thing. And we can pursue it in many ways. We can be a fool. I'm making this up as I go. I have no idea what I'm going to say. But we do know, regardless of all that, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And blessings on you. Thank you. Next week, Ecclesiastes, Sadravko. So be here, be online. Bye-bye.